All right, let's dive in. This time, we're going back to 1960 South Africa to the Rivonia trial.
A pivotal moment for sure.
Definitely. And to really get into it, we're using State versus Nelson Mandela by Joel Joffe.
He was one of the defense lawyers, right?
Right in the thick of it. So it's like we've got this like backstage pass to all the drama, the legal strategies, the personal stories, it's all there.
Trying to understand not just what happened, but like the bigger picture.
Exactly. What does it all mean for fighting oppression, for justice, for all of that?
Well, this trial, it was held in Pretoria from 63 to 64, and it really became this clash of ideologies,
More than just a trial.
way more. It exposed what South Africa was all about back then.
So who are these people on trial? What were they facing?
Okay, so you've got major figures in the anti-apartheid movement: Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, and others.
Big names.
Huge. They dedicated their lives to dismantling apartheid, and the state threw the book at them. Sabotage, attempting to overthrow the government, the whole 9 yards.
And they chose Pretoria for the trial. That couldn't have been random, right?
No way. The government's seat of power. It was a calculated move, hoping for a jury and an atmosphere that leaned their way.
Talk about an uphill battle. So who are these brave lawyers defending them?
The defense was led by Bram Fisher, a brilliant lawyer, and he put himself at risk by taking this case.
Really? How so?
He was part of the system, but defending those accused of wanting to overthrow it.
Wow, that's commitment.
Total commitment to justice. And he had some heavy hitters alongside him. George Bezos, known for taking on political cases, and Vernon Barange, incredible cross-examination.
And of course, Joel Joffe, our author, giving us that insider view.
Exactly.
Besides the location, what other hurdles did they face?
The media was a huge problem. It was a frenzy. And the government was feeding this smear campaign against the accused. It created this atmosphere of fear, of prejudice,
Like the trial was already decided before it started.
pretty much. And then there was the 90-day detention law.
What was that?
The government could detain anyone indefinitely. No communication, nothing. Imagine the potential for abuse.
Coerced confessions, all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the defense knew it. They had to
Yeah.
fight for their clients, but also navigate this rigged system.
A tightrope walk. So let's get into the legal nitty-gritty. Did the defense just play defense, or did they go on the offensive?
They were aggressive from the start. They challenged everything. The first indictment, they went after it hard, said it lacked specifics, didn't connect people to actions.
Well, they got it thrown out.
They did. It was bold.
Yeah.
And it set the bar high for the prosecution.
So round two. Did the prosecution learn their lesson?
Not really.
Yeah.
The defense kept dissecting everything. And then there was the judge, Justice DeWitt.
What about him?
He was unpredictable, often antagonistic towards the defense. It was like another obstacle,
Always kept them on their toes.
for sure. Now, let's talk about the prosecution's case. What were they bringing to the table? This is where things get troubling. A lot of their case relied on these accomplice witnesses.
Accomplice, meaning
People claiming to have been involved with Umkhonto we Sizwe, the ANC's armed wing.
But think back to that 90-day detention law.
Exactly. Many of these witnesses had been held under it, solitary confinement, the whole bit,
Questionable reliability.
to say the least. Some cases were particularly alarming, like Isaac Trial. He described being tortured, electric shocks, beatings.
Brutal.
And the judge, get this, refused to allow expert testimony about the psychological effects of solitary confinement.
Trying to sweep it under the rug.
Seems like it. Then you have Bruno Matolo, who turned informant.
Meaning he was working with the prosecution.
Yeah. He claims Mandela wanted to hide communist ties to get support from African states.
Playing on those Cold War fears, so the defense had their work cut out for them.
They did. They had to challenge every witness, find inconsistencies, contradictions, meticulous cross-examinations. One example, Sergeant Durker, a police officer.
What happened there?
He gave conflicting stories about where key documents were found. It cast doubt on the whole thing.
So they were fighting on all fronts. Evidence, witnesses, even the judge's bias.
It was intense. But they didn't just react. They had a strategy, a proactive one. They saw the trial as more than just a defense.
What do you mean?
They used it as a platform. The world was watching, and they wanted to expose the injustice of apartheid.
So they weren't just defending themselves, they were making a statement.
Exactly. They admitted to planning guerrilla warfare, but said it was a last resort, a response to the state's oppression.
Not just actions, but motivations.
Right. And then there was Mandela's courtroom speech. It was powerful. He said he was willing to die for his ideals.
Iconic.
And Walter Sisulu's cross-examination, it lasted 5 days. He was calm, unwavering, amazing.
So a two-pronged approach. Fight the charges, but also use the trial as a megaphone. High stakes, though.
Extremely high. And to bolster their case, they made a surprising move. They called Alan Patton as a witness.
The author cried the beloved country, but he was against violence, wasn't he?
Exactly, and that was the point. By calling him, they humanized the accused,
Showing that even those who disagreed with their methods.
recognized the moral reasons behind their cause. Smart move. Now, on the prosecution side, leading the charge was Dr. Percy Utar.
What was he like?
Dramatic. Theatrical even. Loved inflammatory language, fear-mongering, that kind of thing.
Trying to stir up public sentiment against the accused.
You could say that. His closing arguments were full of doom and gloom. South Africa would fall apart if these guys were acquitted, he claimed.
But did he have the evidence?
Not really. It was a lot of speculation, flimsy stuff, even outright fabrications. He just wanted a conviction, it seemed.
More about the agenda than justice.
It does make you think. But after all of that, after months of back and forth, what was the verdict? Well, despite the judge being clearly against them, he did agree that guerrilla warfare hadn't actually started. Still, guilty verdicts for everyone,
Guilty.
but no death penalty. Mandela and 7 others got life sentences.
Life sentences. Not the worst outcome, considering.
Considering everything, yeah, it might have even felt like a partial win for the defense. They avoided the ultimate punishment.
The Ravoni trial, it wasn't just about the courtroom, was it?
No. It was about ideologies, about resilience, about the whole fight against apartheid,
A trial that captured the world's attention?
and it helped lay the groundwork for apartheid's eventual end.
It's incredible to think that one trial could have such a ripple effect.
It all comes back to the human element. These weren't just names on a piece of paper. These were husbands, fathers, sons, daughters, each with their own story.
And their stories are woven into this grand narrative.
They make history come alive. They remind us that behind the big events, there are real people, real struggles, real sacrifices.
And that's what we'll be exploring as we dive deeper.
We'll see how those personal struggles intertwine with the trial itself. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about how one trial can become so much bigger than just the courtroom. So many lives affected. And you mentioned those personal stories. I'd love to hear more about that, like the human cost of all this.
It really hits you when you start looking at their lives,
Yeah.
Like Bram Fisher, the lead lawyer. He risked everything, freedom, career, family, all of it, to defend these guys.
It's almost unimaginable.
Right, to defend people accused of trying to overthrow the very system you're a part of.
Talk about a crisis of conscience. And Joff's book really brings that home.
Definitely. The whole defense team, their struggles, their sacrifices, they weren't just going through the motions. They were in it for the cause. Surveillance, harassment, the threat of arrest hanging over them. It was intense.
And what about the families of the accused? They must have gone through hell too.
Absolutely. The separation, the constant fear, the stigma of being associated with, enemies of the state.
I can't even imagine.
One woman who really stands out is Albertina Sisulu, Walter's wife. She was incredible. Kept organizing, speaking out, keeping the spirit of resistance alive while her husband was locked up.
A true icon. These personal stories, they really bring history to life more than any textbook could.
They make it real, These weren't just names on a charge sheet. They were real people. Families, dreams, fears, all fighting for something better.
It's a good reminder that history is made by people, not just abstract forces. So let's shift gears a bit. What happened after the trial? We know they got life sentences, but where did they end up? What was life like for them?
Most of them went to Robben Island, that infamous prison off the coast of Cape Town. It was designed to break them. Isolation, harsh conditions, no hope.
A bleak place.
Yeah. But even there, they found ways to resist. They organized, educated themselves, found those small ways to defy the system every day.
You mentioned education. Wasn't it Mandela who got a law degree while on Robben Island?
He did. Incredible, right?
Mm.
He refused to let his circumstances define him. And he wasn't alone. A lot of the prisoners used that time to study, read, write, and gauge their minds.
The human spirit is amazing, finding ways to thrive even in the worst conditions.
It really is. And that knowledge, they used it to help each other, create a sense of community. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about keeping the fight alive.
Turning their prison into a university of sorts. So as the years went by, their imprisonment became a symbol, didn't it?
It did. It became this symbol of resistance against apartheid. And their names, they became known all over the world. They became icons.
So being locked up almost amplified their message.
In a way, yeah. And it sparked a movement. Anti-apartheid groups grew stronger worldwide. It put immense pressure on the South African government. These men, physically imprisoned, became a source of inspiration for a global movement.
Incredible how their imprisonment meant to silence them ended up doing the opposite. But how did they eventually get free?
It was a long process, a combination of things: internal resistance, international pressure. The political landscape was changing. Eventually, the government had to give in. They unbanned the ANC, started releasing political prisoners.
Mandela's release in 1990, that must have been huge.
All massive. After 27 years, it was like this symbol of a new era for South Africa, a new beginning.
What about the others from the Rivonia trial?
They were released over time in the early 90s, each one a cause for celebration, a step closer to a free South Africa.
And after they were released, what did they do? These men who were once called criminals, terrorists.
A lot of them ended up in leadership positions in the new government. Mandela, of course, became the first president of a democratic South Africa. He led the country through this really delicate period of reconciliation and rebuilding.
It's incredible to think about that. They suffered so much under apartheid, but then became instrumental in building a new nation based on equality, justice.
It really shows their commitment to their ideals, their capacity for forgiveness is powerful. It tells us that history isn't set in stone. We can change things even after facing such adversity.
It's an inspiring thought. So we've talked about the trial, the players, the imprisonment, their release, but let's zoom out for a second. What about the bigger picture? What impact did the Rivonia trial have on the world?
It became a defining moment of the 20th century, I think, a symbol of the struggle against racial injustice. It challenged apartheid, of course, but it also challenged the world's conscience. People had to confront the realities of racial inequality.
It went beyond South Africa.
Definitely. It was about human rights, equality, everywhere. The Rivonia trial became a symbol of hope for oppressed people around the globe. It showed that even the most entrenched systems of injustice could be challenged.
It's a reminder that the fight for justice never really ends.
Yeah, there are always new challenges, new forms of oppression. We have to keep fighting.
Now, we've talked about communism quite a bit. The prosecution was really trying to make it seem like the accused were communist puppets. But how accurate was that? Was the South African Communist Party really calling the shots?
It's more complicated than that. Yes, some of the accused, like Mandela and Mbeki, had links to the Communist Party.
But was the whole movement a communist plot?
No, not at all. The ANC and the Communist Party, their relationship was complex. They had shared goals, ending apartheid, social justice, things like that. But they also had their differences. It was more like an alliance, a temporary one, than one controlling the other.
So not as simple as the prosecution tried to make it seem.
Right. The ANC was this broad movement, lots of different ideologies within it: liberalism, African nationalism, and, yes, communism too. The prosecution was using the fear of communism to try and discredit the entire movement.
A classic smear tactic.
Yeah, using a label to shut down any opposition. The apartheid regime did that a lot.
To make any dissent seem illegitimate, how did the defense handle that? Did they distance their clients from the Communist Party?
They were smarter than that. They said, look, yes, there are communists in the movement, but that doesn't make the whole movement communist. They focused on the shared goals: ending apartheid, a just society, things that transcended ideology.
Smart. Appealing to a wider audience.
Exactly. And it worked. The trial became a global condemnation of apartheid, not communism. The world saw through the propaganda.
It shows that communication, how you frame things, it
Yeah,
matters.
big time. So the trial made the world see apartheid as a crime against humanity. Not just South Africa's problem, but the world's problem.
Yeah.
It helped change the narrative, got more international support, and ultimately it helped bring down apartheid.
It's incredible that a single trial could have such a huge impact.
And it comes back to the people, their courage, their belief in a better future.
It really is a reminder that the fight for justice is never easy, but it's always worth it.
Absolutely. The Rivonia trial, it was a victory for humanity.
Huh?
And its legacy is still inspiring us today.
Okay, we've covered a lot. Legal strategies, the politics, the personal stories, the impact. But there's one person we can't ignore: Nelson Mandela.
Ah, Mandela, an incredible figure.
He was key in the trial, but how did his experiences before Rivonia, during, after, shape him into the icon we know today?
Mandela's journey is fascinating. He started as a lawyer, heavily involved in the ANC's peaceful protests. But as the state got more and more repressive, brutal towards peaceful protests, Mandela's views on using force started to change.
He started to believe that armed struggle was necessary.
Yeah, he saw it as a last resort, a way to defend his people against a system that wouldn't listen to them. and he played a big role in setting up Mkanto Sizwe, advocating for sabotage of government targets, which is what got him arrested in '62.
So he wasn't just a figurehead, he was actively shaping the movement.
Absolutely. And the Ravoni trial, that's where Mandela really stepped onto the world stage. His statements in court, especially his "I am prepared to die" speech, it explained why they were fighting against apartheid. It caught the world's attention and made him into a global symbol of resistance.
That speech is so powerful. Why do you think it resonated so much?
It was defiance, but also dignity. He spoke with conviction. It was about equality, justice. But it was also about his commitment to the cause, even facing death. It resonated with people all over the world who wanted freedom and justice.
And then his time in prison, it didn't silence him, it did the opposite.
Exactly. On Robben Island, he became a symbol of hope, of unwavering commitment. His imprisonment actually strengthened his moral authority.
It's strange how sometimes being in prison can make a leader even more influential.
It's true. Mandela is a perfect example. And when he was finally released in '90, it was a global celebration, a victory for human rights and the power of perseverance.
A historic moment. And to Mandela's credit, he used his freedom to promote peace, reconciliation, not revenge.
Exactly. He could have easily sought revenge, but he chose forgiveness, reconciliation. He urged South Africans to face their past, to build a new nation together. It says a lot about his character, his vision.
It's an inspiring example of leadership, a reminder that even after facing such cruelty, you can still choose compassion, choose hope.
Forgiveness and reconciliation, they're not signs of weakness. They take immense strength and courage.
It's a message that goes far beyond South Africa. It shows the power of the human spirit to overcome any challenge.
Mandela's legacy is a complex one. He was a revolutionary, a leader, a prisoner, a president, and of course a global icon.
And his story, it's tied to the Ravoni trial, the event that shaped his destiny and his place in history.
The Ravoni trial, it was like a crucible for Mandela. It revealed his leadership, his incredible qualities. It's a story that keeps inspiring us, challenging us.
It feels like we've just begun to explore this story. What would you say is the most important thing we can take away from this deep dive?
For me, it's remembering that even small acts of courage can have a huge impact. The people on trial, they could have chosen to stay silent, to go along with everything, blend in, keep their heads down, but they didn't.
They spoke truth to power. They challenged the system. They knew the risks.
And their choices, their sacrifices, they helped dismantle apartheid, create a new South Africa.
Exactly. They refused to accept injustice. They believed in a better future, even when it seemed impossible. It teaches us that we can all make a difference. Stand up for what's right. Make the world a little more just, a little more equal. That's inspiring. Sometimes it feels overwhelming, the amount of injustice in the world. But the Ravoni trial, it shows us that every act of courage, every voice raised, it matters.
It's a group effort. Every bit of resistance, no matter how small, it contributes. The Ravoni trial shows us that we're not powerless. We can make a difference. And facing the challenges of our time, their story gives us hope, shows us the way.
You're right. We can learn from their courage, their resilience, that belief in a better world. It's contagious. They show us that the fight for justice, it's never really over. We all have to play a part in creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect.
That's a great point. Now, there's one event that sounds like it came straight out of a spy movie. The escape. Before the trial, two of the accused, Goldright and Volpe, they broke out of prison.
Yeah.
What happened there? And how did it affect the trial? Oh, that escape was something else. It shows you their ingenuity, their courage, their sheer determination. And this wasn't some easy prison. This was Marshall Square in Johannesburg, a high-security place.
So how did they do it?
The details are still a bit murky, but there was planning involved, some help from the inside, and of course, a little luck.
It wasn't just those two, right?
Right. Two other detainees escaped with him, Musamula and Abdullah Jassat. They were being held under that 90-day detention law.
It must have been a huge embarrassment for the authorities.
Totally. It made headlines around the world, it showed the cracks in the apartheid state, and it fueled the opposition.
Like a real-life prison break with political intrigue, high stakes.
And it definitely impacted the trial. With those two gone, the prosecution had to scramble. And it created this atmosphere of paranoia, heightened security. The trial was already tense, and this just made it more so.
I can only imagine the scene in court when they realized those guys had vanished. What happened to them? Did they go into hiding or keep fighting from somewhere else?
They got out of South Africa, eventually settling in different parts of the world. Goldrick went to Israel, Wolpe ended up in England, and he kept working against apartheid from there.
So their escape, it wasn't just about personal freedom.
Right. It was a symbolic victory for the resistance, a testament to their resilience. It showed that the fight for justice takes many forms, inside the courtroom and outside.
It's a story that needs its own deep dive.
Absolutely. Full of intrigue and daring, and it shows how the Rivonia trial was part of this much bigger global struggle.
It shows how individual actions can ripple outwards, the power of courage, the resilience of the human spirit against all odds.
It forces us to confront the injustices of our own time, to stand up for what's right, to never give up on hope for a better world.
I feel the weight of that, you know? It makes you think about your own responsibility, to actually do something, not just sit back and watch.
That's what makes the Rivonia trial and the stories of everyone involved so relevant. They remind us that we're not just watching history, we're inheriting it, shaping it, telling its story.
And it's up to us to carry on the fight for justice, to learn from the past, and to work towards a future where everyone is treated with dignity and respect.
Well said. The Rivonia trial, it wasn't just about South Africa. It was about this universal desire for freedom, equality, and a world where justice wins.
Those are things worth fighting for no matter what.
Absolutely. And as we face the challenges of today, the courage and conviction of those who fought against apartheid that can inspire us, guide us.
It's a story that stays with you. So, we've talked about the prosecution, but I'm curious about the defense team. How did they approach this case? Such a complex situation, such high stakes. What were their goals? How did they deal with the challenges of defending people accused of treason?
They had a huge task ahead of them. Defending these guys against a state that wanted to silence them, it was like David versus Goliath.
They must have felt the pressure.
Oh, for sure. They knew they couldn't just win on legal technicalities. They had to challenge the whole basis of the state's case, made people see their clients as human beings, and expose how unjust apartheid was.
It sounds like they were fighting on multiple fronts: legal, political, moral.
Exactly. They had this multi-layered approach. They had a strong legal defense, but they also had a bold political strategy. They analyzed every single piece of evidence, challenged witnesses, pointed out procedural errors, but they also used the trial as a platform, a way to amplify their clients' voices, explain their motivations, and make a case against apartheid itself.
So they're trying to win in the court of public opinion, too.
Absolutely. They knew the world was watching the Rivonia trial, and they wanted to use that attention to their advantage.
What were some of their strategies?
Well, one thing they did was go after the first indictment on procedural grounds. They said it was too vague, didn't link specific actions to specific people.
And it worked. They got the whole thing thrown out. The prosecution had to start over.
It was a big win for the defense. Show their legal skills, their determination to make sure the trial was fair, even though the system was against them.
So what about the second indictment?
They kept at it, carefully analyzing the charges, highlighting inconsistencies, questioning the legal basis of the accusations. They also focused on discrediting the prosecution's witnesses, especially the ones who had been held in solitary confinement under that 90-day law.
So they were constantly chipping away at the prosecution's case, casting doubt on their evidence, their witnesses.
Exactly. And they were masters of cross-examination. They used it to expose contradictions, inconsistencies in the witnesses' stories. They poked holes in the prosecution's whole narrative.
Like a game of legal chess, but with really high stakes.
It was a really impressive team. It wasn't by chance that the defense had some of the best legal minds in South Africa. They were incredibly prepared. They thought of every angle, came up with counter-arguments.
It was skill, strategy, and total dedication to their clients and the cause.
Absolutely. They weren't just defending individuals. They were challenging a whole system, an ideology, a way of life based on racism and oppression. They were fighting for the soul of South Africa.
That's a heavy responsibility, and in a lot of ways they succeeded. Even though their clients were found guilty, the Rivonia trial showed the world how brutal apartheid was. And it really helped energize the opposition to the regime.
It was a major turning point in the struggle against apartheid. It showed that even when you're up against a repressive state, the law can be a powerful weapon against injustice.
The Rivonia trial reminds us that the fight for justice is hard, it takes time, it demands courage, and it demands a willingness to stand up for what's right, no matter what.
It's really inspiring. And it shows us that even when things seem impossible, it's possible to make a difference. You can challenge injustice and fight for a better world.
Their tenacity and dedication are incredible. It makes you think about the choices we make in our own lives, the importance of standing up for what you believe in.
Their story reminds us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have the courage to act on their convictions. Now, beyond the legal stuff, the politics. There's the human element, the accused, their families, the lawyers, everyone involved. What did Joffe's book tell us about them? Their lives, their motivations, their struggles.
I'm really interested to hear more about that side of things.
Joppa does a great job of bringing those stories to life. He reminds us that the Ravonia trial wasn't just a legal case, it was a deeply personal experience for everyone involved.
So, who are some of the people who really stood out to you?
Walter Sisulu, for sure. He had this quiet strength, this unwavering belief in what he was fighting for. Even when they were interrogating him relentlessly, he never wavered. He was a rock.
He sounds like he had amazing inner strength.
He did. His cross-examination it went on for 5 days, and he was just so composed, so convicted. He never backed down, even when they were being aggressive with him, trying to discredit him. He was a model of courage and integrity.
It's inspiring to think about. Even in the most difficult situations, you can still hold on to your dignity, keep fighting for what you believe in.
Exactly. He shows us the power of the human spirit to endure, to resist, even when the odds are stacked against you.
And what about Nelson Mandela? What did Joff's book reveal about his personality, his leadership style? How did he change as a man throughout this experience?
Joffe paints a really interesting picture of Mandela. He was a complex guy, warm, but also strategic,
Good.
charismatic, inspirational, but also pragmatic, willing to compromise.
So he wasn't just a symbol, he was a real person making tough choices in a dangerous situation.
Exactly. He went from being a young lawyer, advocating for nonviolent resistance, to a leader who embraced armed struggle. That shows how much he was willing to learn, adapt, put the needs of his people before his own beliefs.
What about the lawyers on the defense team? They were clearly more than just lawyers, they were part of the struggle. What did Joffe tell us about them? Their motivation, their sacrifices?
Joffe really takes us behind the scenes, shows us what they went through, the surveillance, the threats, the possibility of being arrested. They were working within a legal system that was biased against them. They knew their actions could have terrible consequences for them and their families.
It must have been incredibly stressful trying to defend their clients while also staying safe themselves.
It was a constant balancing act, and it makes their dedication even more impressive. They weren't just lawyers, they were activists. They put their lives on the line to defend the people who were brave enough to challenge apartheid.
It shows their courage, their belief in the power of law to change things, even in a system designed to uphold injustice.
Definitely. It reminds us that even regular people can do extraordinary things when they stand up for what's right. So beyond the law and the politics, the Ravonia trial was a story of resilience, faith, and the strength of the human spirit in the face of oppression.
It's a story that makes us think about our own values. What would we do in a situation like that? How can we contribute to a more just world?
That's what makes the Ravonia trial so important today. It's not just a historical event, it's a call to action. A reminder that the fight for justice is never truly over. It's up to all of us to work for a better future.
Now, there's one aspect we haven't really talked about yet: violence.
Right. The prosecution's argument was that the accused were dangerous terrorists who wanted to overthrow the government through violence. But the defense argued that their actions were a response to the state's own violence, its oppression.
Which brings up the whole question of violence in political struggles. When is it justified? What are the consequences? How did the Ravonia trial deal with these difficult questions?
The trial became a place to debate the ethics of violence, especially in the context of such an unjust, repressive system. The accused, through their own words and their lawyers, admitted that what they did was morally complex. But they insisted that violence was a last resort, something they had to do because of the state's brutality.
So they were saying it was self-defense, protecting their communities from the violence of the regime.
Exactly. They said the state had made peaceful resistance impossible. That armed struggle was the only way to challenge the system, to achieve liberation. It wasn't about glorifying violence, it was about acknowledging that sometimes it's necessary in extreme situations.
It was about dismantling a system of oppression and building a just society.
Right. And they were very clear that their goal wasn't violence for its own sake. It was about creating a just, equitable society. And sometimes achieving that means meeting violence with violence.
So the Ravonia trial forced people to face this uncomfortable truth, that sometimes violence is unavoidable in the fight against injustice.
Yes. And it brings up questions that we're still grappling with today. When is violence the right answer? How much violence is acceptable in political struggles? How do you balance justice with peace?
These are tough questions, no easy answers, but the Ravonia trial reminds us that we can't ignore them. We have to talk about them honestly. Think about the history, the ethics, and the human cost of violence.
I agree. The Ravonia trial wasn't just about South Africa in the 1960s. It was about this universal human struggle for justice, freedom, equality. And it's a struggle that continues today. It forces us to face uncomfortable truths, make difficult choices, and never give up hope.
I can feel the weight of that history, all the complexities, the challenges.
It's a story that stays with you.
It does. It makes you realize that we're not just watching history happen, we're part of it. We shape it, we tell its story.
And it's our job to keep the fight for justice alive, to learn from what's come before, and to work towards a future where everyone is treated with dignity and respect.
This deep dive into the Ravonia trial has been amazing. We've covered a lot, but it feels like we've just scratched the surface.
It's true. There's so much more to discover. The lives of the people involved, the legal arguments, the political landscape, the global impact. It's a story that needs to be told and retold. And each time you find new meaning, new significance.
I'm already thinking about how this applies to my own life. The choices I make, the stands I take, the kind of world I want to build.
That's the power of history.
Yeah.
It makes you look at your own values, your own actions, your place in the world.
Before we finish up, there's one more thing I want to talk about. The prosecution spent the whole trial trying to paint the accused as dangerous radicals, trying to make them seem like they wanted to destroy South Africa.
Oh yeah, classic fear-mongering. A tried and true tactic to discredit opposition and justify repression.
Right. But how did the defense counter that? How did they portray their clients? What message were they trying to send to the court, to the world?
The defense had a delicate job. They had to acknowledge how serious the charges were, but they also had to show their clients as human beings. They had to put their actions into context. They weren't denying what their clients did, they were explaining why they did it.
So they wanted to show that these men weren't monsters. They were people who believed in justice and equality.
Exactly. They argued that the accused weren't revolutionaries who loved violence. They were principled men who were pushed to their limits by the state's own violence and stubbornness.
So they were saying it was a last resort. They were forced to take up arms because peaceful protests were met with brutality. Like, they were saying, we didn't choose violence, violence chose us.
Exactly. And they talked about all the sacrifices the accused had made, how they were willing to risk their lives for justice and equality. They showed their humanity, their courage, their commitment.
So they were reframing the narrative, making it about the motivations, the context, not just the actions themselves.
Right. And they used the trial to expose the injustices of apartheid, the racism that was everywhere in South Africa. They turned the tables, put apartheid itself on trial.
Smart. They forced the court and the whole world to see the truth about apartheid. All the daily indignities, the economic exclusion, the violence that Black South Africans faced just because of their skin color.
It was brilliant, legally sound, and it was this powerful moral attack on apartheid. It shows us that legal battles aren't just about laws. It's about power, about who controls the story, about shaping what people believe.
And the defense in the Ravonia trial, they got that. They used the trial to fight back against the government's propaganda.
And they were really good at it. Even though they didn't get their clients acquitted, the trial changed how the world saw apartheid. It helped build a movement for sanctions, for international pressure on the South African government.
It shows the power of words, of legal strategy, of believing in justice, even when you're up against a powerful opponent.
It's a story of hope. It shows that even when the odds are stacked against you, you can fight injustice, you can make a difference.
This deep dive into the Ravonia trial has been incredible. We've covered a lot. The history, the legal battles, the personal stories, the lasting impact.
It's a story about what it means to be human, the courage of people who stand up for what they believe in, and the power of hope, even in the face of oppression.
As we wrap up, what would you say is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the Ravonia trial shows us that the fight for justice never really ends. It's a journey, and each generation has to pick up the torch and carry it forward. We have to learn from the past, face the injustices that are happening now, and keep working towards a future where everyone is treated equally, with dignity and respect.
That's a powerful thought. The Ravonia trial, it wasn't just a moment in time. It sparked change. It gave people hope, and it showed the power of the human spirit.
It did.
Hmm.
And as we move forward, let's remember the courage, the conviction, and the commitment to justice that those who challenged apartheid showed us.
It's a story that will stay with me, and with our listeners, I hope. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Ravonia trial.
It's been a pleasure.